Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the .NET Community Stand-Up, the Tooling Edition.
The best edition.
Yeah, I'm just making sure we're showing up on YouTube and Twitch. Looks good to me. Hi, everyone. How's the morning going?
It's good. It feels like a Monday.
Yeah.
I took yesterday off, so
Nice.
it's like Monday today. It's like a bonus Monday.
Yeah. I think we have some very justifiable snow days. It's hard to get snow days when you're working from home either way, but got to just reward yourself.
Yeah.
Cool. So for those who are new, this is the .NET Community Tooling Stand-Up, where we talk about the cool tools that are available around .NET and C#. We have, I'm one of the hosts, Kendra Havens. I'm Program Manager on .NET and Visual Studio. With me are my co-hosts, Jordan and Cody. You guys want a quick intro?
Yeah, I'm Cody. I'm a Program Manager on the Developer Division here at Microsoft, focusing across all the different tools that we use to develop software and trying to make them as great as can be.
Beautiful.
I'm Jordan. I am a program manager on Visual Studio for Mac, so our .NET IDE for developers working from a Mac.
And Jordan's grainy today, and we've already given him a hard time about it. So,
My rural network's not happy.
Yeah. And with us today is a wonderful guest I'm really excited to talk to, Andrew Stellman. Do you want to give a quick intro about what you work on?
Hey, everybody. I'm Andrew, and I'm the author of Head for C#, published by O'Reilly Media, and a bunch of other books published by O'Reilly. And I kind of live to teach people how to use C#, .NET, and Visual Studio.
Yes, that is what we love to hear.
Yes.
So excited. We were just talking before the stream started about how important education is in these times, especially online materials, especially getting access to them, access to PDFs online, YouTube videos, live streams where you can just chat your questions directly to the O'Reilly author, for example, like right now.
Maybe.
Pretty cool.
And also, like, just the self-guided pace of it too, I think is really important in this distance time of, like, it's pretty unique that we can sit in a room and learn something from, I was going to say from a book, because that's not unique. That's been going on forever. But, in the high-tech world of being able to really delve deep into a programming language, depending on your experience level, is pretty nice.
I got to agree. One of the most important parts of, if you're learning a tool, if you're learning a programming language, getting your hands on the keyboard is really, really important. And having a book is great. But we live in being able to have it plus YouTube videos plus something like this, being able to ask people, just having a way to reach out, rather than having some random forum, being able to be accessible to readers. I feel like even if you never take advantage of it, knowing that you can actually reach out and say hi, knowing that you're dealing with like a person and not just random author, I feel like that actually helps with learning. Like I feel like anything we can do to make things feel less formal, less stuffy. It's so easy to throw barriers in the way to learning. And I feel like we live in a time when we can actually kind of clear some of those barriers. I feel like that's, as somebody who just kind of spends so much time thinking about how people learn, talking to people who learn, trying to find new ways to get people to get the stuff into their brains. That's huge. That's huge for me, and I hope it's huge for people learning too.
Absolutely. I never would have gotten through like data structures without YouTube. I don't actually know how people did it before.
Well,
I'm a visual learner at the max,
Well, I was learning about data structures. I was at Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s, and that's before YouTube.
How'd you do it? I don't know.
It was definitely did not have. It was definitely a textbook, a lecture, and whatever notes I took at the lecture. And I feel like we have that and 1,000 times things more. Like it's so much easier to learn now.
Yeah. I do love the idea of having something physical. I think something like stays with you way more. I love having a bookshelf, even though like the majority of my books are digital and everything. Exactly.
Cody, awesome.
It makes me.
I've got mine around over here too. I was like, we had a conversation about this very thing recently of this. Like, something exciting about getting the actual physical book, even if you end up using a lot of stuff online. But maybe that's my also late '90s upbringing in tech as well. Was more book than anything.
Well, I think the thing
Yeah,
about books is, yeah, exactly, and it's harder to get distracted by books, right? Because I can't go to Hacker News on a book, right? Because it's not. It's a book.
Yeah.
I can't navigate somewhere else. So that really focuses my mind. Somebody who's like I am, kind of constantly going in 9 different directions. Having that purposeful moment with the book is nice.
It's funny. I'm one of the things it's sort of a phrase that's been in my mind lately is kind of being a long form writer in a short form world. Like, I mean, this thing's thick, right? We got many hundreds of pages, and writing a book is, compared to maintaining a solid YouTube channel or solid Twitter. I mean, I think people underestimate how much work it is to keep something live and engaging, and it's an entirely different skill set. But if the end goal is to get people to actually learn, like to me, I see everything in terms of how do we get people to learn? Like how do I, and it's interesting to see the different goals there. Like, yeah, you're on YouTube, you can easily jump over to, whatever Reddit or, Hacker News or whatever you're, and it's super, it's a terrible problem if ADHD is strong with you. But it's also, I am not convinced that that's actually a problem, though. I feel like giving yourselves if the way you learn involves jumping around between things, giving yourselves distraction, giving yourselves an easy way to cut back and forth in it. I think we're told that that's a bad thing, but I don't think it is. I feel like I've known too many people with severe ADHD who seem to learn, like you can just funnel stuff into them. Somehow they're learning really, really well. So I don't see it. I feel like it's a difference, I feel like it's just a different mode of learning. I don't think I feel like we too easily pass judgment, especially those of us who've been writing for a long time.
Sure, I think, this kind of, to do a throwback to our previous episode for our longtime viewers. Last time we spoke wasn't that long ago, but we talked to some of the design team about how they make software in a way that's easy to learn and easy to adapt to. And I think if you take a learning perspective on that as well, it's amazing what we can do if that's a foundational piece of your design, of your thought process, is how to make this easy for people to learn, how to make this easy for people to adapt to different neurodiversity, different ways of viewing the world. And considering all those points can help you make tools that are just natural as opposed to something you have to learn, right? Like, to me, it's always the best when you don't realize you're learning, because that's when it's the most natural. That's when it's the most sticky, to me at least, right? If I don't know I'm learning, if I don't think I'm learning, I'm just doing something, that's when it sticks the longest. So
that's a really, really interesting point. I've taking off my sort of C# and .NET hat for a minute and putting on my Agile hat, because that's two of the books that Jenny Green and I have written for O'Reilly are on learning Agile and Head First Agile. And one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is emergent design. How you use test-driven development and unit tests to create small units, and you build your classes or whatever the units in your language are, and then you build your systems, larger systems, out of not just the classes themselves, but the interactions between them, the behavior, and some behavior of your system emerges from the behavior of those. And a huge challenge of that is making things obvious, because that's the one side of Agile is emergent design. The other side of Agile is making things obvious, keeping things, user stories are great because they're really easy to understand. And the story itself isn't really what's important. What's important is that when I see it and it's a really easy way to make sure that what's in my head matches what's in your head. And I'm finally, just because I know we're talking about tooling, one of the tooling things that I love is the refactoring tools. The refactoring tools in Visual Studio, I freaking love. I use a lot of I use a lot of different IDEs. Like I do a lot of Scala development, just day to day. And I would love to use Visual Studio for that, but right now it's IDEA. And I like the refactoring tools in IDEA, but I love the refactoring tools in Visual Studio.
Awesome.
and one of the things I when I'm training, especially when I'm training junior people, is I like to tell them, like, refactor. When you show somebody extracting a method is straightforward, right? We have a bit about that in C#. Like we actually show them, here's how to extract a method. It's straightforward. Once you've been working with methods, it's immediately, it's one of those things that's immediately obvious. And that's whenever I see something that's immediately obvious, not only is it a good tool for building code, but I also think that's a good tool for learning, right? Finding what. But what I really like when we're talking about going back to what Cody was saying a minute ago, what I really like telling people is they never know where to put comments in. Do we put I have been having arguments about whether or not to comment your code, how much to comment your code, from the let's put lots of explanations here so I can just explain my thinking, all the way to we should have 0 comments in there. Everything should be immediately obvious from looking at the code. I never liked that point of view, but I respect it, and I've definitely read code from people who have that, and their code is very readable when they really, that's their mindset. And what I like to tell people is if you're trying to figure out where to put a comment in your code, find a good method to refactor. Like your method's long, refactor part of it. It's always okay to refactor things, especially if you don't even have to refactor to plan to use it in the future. Just refactor to make it easier to understand now. And then you've done 2 things. You've given it a name. And I think that one of the most powerful things we do as developers is name things.
One of the most powerful and terrible. No.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know. One.
And then you know where to put your comment now. You stick a XML, if it's if you're C#, you stick XML doc at the top of the method, and your comment has a rightful place. You've given it a name that's understandable, and you've given it a comment that explains it. I think in over my shoulder you can see a cat. There's a dog around here somewhere.
I love it. Cameo.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the sort of thing, as I mentioned, I was studying computer science at Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s. Working, writing C and C++ and other languages in Emacs is a very different experience. Although I have to say my favorite IDE at the time was probably Quick Basic 4.5. And I like to think that there is a little bit of the soul of Quick Basic 4.5 lives on in Visual Studio, I believe.
In a good way.
Definitely. Yeah.
I know.
And I feel like things like what I just said, like being able to just refactor, pull out, add a comment, where we're talking about a couple of mouse tricks, hit // and type, and you're done. That kind of this tooling support that kind of, like, you just saved me 10 minutes of typing, and that kind of tooling, when it's that simple, when it can be that in your fingers, it reminds me of one of our tech reviewers, Tatiana Mack, amazing engineer. She one reason I asked her to be a tech reviewer for us was she's also a concert pianist, and that's which I personally love, because before I studied computer science at Carnegie Mellon, I went to high school at LaGuardia High School of Music and Performing Arts, studying piano, bass guitar, jazz, and cello. So like music is so this really spoke to me when she was like, she talked about, she kind of drew a line between getting getting things into your fingers and as a pianist, and understanding getting the like keyboard shortcuts and IDE shortcuts into your fingers as an IDE user. And I thought that was, first of all, super wise. Like, just there's the wisdom embedded in that is amazing. But also like just solid advice.
That explains why I'm not a very good developer. No, I'm kidding. I'm a terrible musician. Like I can't I just can't.
But now I'm imagining there actually is probably a lot of commonality between pianists and like keyboard shortcuts. Like imagine the I don't know, everything you can hit and kind of how differently you understand it. Like people say when you write things down with a pencil rather than type, you understand it differently. But oh man.
And you mentioned going to college in the 90s. I went to college in the 2000s. Is that it? The aughts? Is that what we're calling it these days?
Aughts. Let's call it the aughts.
Yeah, I still had to take tests with pen and paper for like you had to write code out with pencil. And that was so difficult. Like mostly now that we're like, blessed with IDEs that give us IntelliSense and IntelliCode. Being like having to remember method names and not just hitting tab at the top one. That's hard. It's insane. That was like one of the hardest classes I had to do as a teacher that required us to take tests with pen and paper.
One of my biggest pet peeves is when people do job interviews and are asked to write stuff on a whiteboard, like write code on a whiteboard. Designing on a whiteboard is awesome, but writing code, I have been a professional developer for, hi Cody. I have been a professional developer for over a quarter century. And I think the number of times I've actually written lines of code on a whiteboard is like, I can count on my hands, right? It's just not, if you're going to talk about educational neuroscience, you're going to start talking about modalities, and it's totally different modality. Hey, we're back.
Sorry, did I accidentally sorry, I might have clicked on something.
No, I clicked log in on accident. I don't know why.
Oh, okay, got it.
Because it's there. Because there's a link and you see it and you want to click it. I think that's something that most of us who are developers and like just have it in our heart. We have the thing where there's a big red button. You just need to press that freaking button.
Yeah,
we can't
we can put that into learning too.
That's
more big red buttons.
That was one of the ideas. Like that's just one of the ideas behind the Head First books, and we really try to embrace in Head First C# is switching modalities and giving you a big giving you a button to press, getting your fingers on the keyboards, and giving you something quick, and that you can immediately see results and you can feel good. Like that's actually why I loved putting Unity in. Like I love and the Unity tooling in Visual Studio. Oh, chef's kiss. And the things you guys are doing are coming up, or just as fun running hearing are even better.
I won't forget.
Being able to go in from just get started, jump in, and suddenly you've got some spinning sphere rotating, and it's just super satisfying. There's being able to go in and design, seeing something visual is just, it just scratches the same itch that I see the login link. I gotta press the login link. What's going to happen if I'm already streaming? What happens if I do that? Well, I guess
I learned that one. And one of the things that I think is important about this tooling conversation is that we're also talking about our tooling, right? The Visual Studio tooling. We're also talking about what we think and through our experience makes good tools, because a lot of the people who are watching this may be working on tools for their own company or their own projects. So what are some things that you think have developed over the past few years that have been like game-changing as far as tooling is concerned, right?
Refactor rename.
Nice.
Refactor rename is especially when you can see, like when you click it and you start typing it and you see the same variable somewhere else and it changes the name elsewhere in the code and right in front of you, like that's huge. It's like I feel like it used to be not just annoying, but super error prone to rename things to the point where it was just a barrier. Mm-hmm. And I feel like so much of the tooling is about identifying and removing barriers. One of the things, again, it's going back to a little bit back to agile, because it's something we think about a lot in agile is flow, right? You get into that state of flow I don't know if you've ever spent time talking to elite athletes. I've had the privilege of spending a decent amount of time talking to WNBA players and coaches, and go Minnesota Lynx, by the way, which is surprising because I'm here in Brooklyn. You'd think I'd be saying go Liberty. He's a Lynx fan. But the what I and one of the things you'll talk about, people, this is real, is getting in the zone. Again, and we have it too. Again, with a state of flow, it takes anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes to get into that state of flow. And once you're there, the rest of the world kind of fades away, and you just, you look down and you look up and it's 2 hours later and you've written a ton of code.
Is this the argument against open offices? Oh
gosh, I was literally just talking about that last night, about how much open offices. I almost want to say one of the things that's going to lead us to being all remote all the time is that we're going back to open offices, and there's nothing that destroys your concentration like being in one.
It's not at that point, or that strict point of comparison now between completely isolated to completely.
Yes. Oh, that's a good point. But yeah, I feel like being able to hit, one keystroke, and suddenly you're naming the variables. You just don't even think about it; it just happened. It's in your fingers, like this with a piano analogy. And having these things, that is a barrier to flow that you've just removed, because there's nothing worse than having to do search and replace through all your files to replace this variable name, except you have to go through each one because there's another variable that's that plus 2 other characters, and you can't rename that one. And it's just like that. The first time I saw it, I was like magic. It was magic. And it's just, that's, to me, that's what, that's one of the, great tooling gets you into flow fast and removes barriers. But it's.
Yeah. And it's like you're talking about one specific example, but there's 50 of these really tiny ones. I think we just added, if you type a semicolon after an open parentheses, it'll actually add the ending parentheses and put your cursor back inside the parentheses if a parameter is required. And it's just those little shortcuts. I still need to kind of get used to them, because I'm used to I think I always type double quotes. I always type the end quote and then arrow back into them. Mm-hmm. I can't accept that my IDE will just do it for me. It's it's too risky still. I hope someday I'll be able to train my fingers, my muscle memory out of when all of those add up over time, it's so cool to hear about this, because I have been in design meetings where we have debated for an hour about how IntelliSense and overload completion need to interact. So what we wanted to do was, as soon as you type an open parentheses and there's many overloads in a method, we will now also load the IntelliSense list as well as the overload completion list. And you need to press escape now to get back to the overload list. Hours of debate amongst our teams of what that keyboard interaction needed to be, and how many people's muscle memory we're going to break. And one of the developers was like, when this rolled out internally, it broke me. I had no idea how to get back to the overload menu. I had to use my mouse, and it was just a disaster. Which wow. I love. That fine-tuned kind of attention that we're trying to pay to all those little things. It is about removing barriers. We don't always do it right, but we can keep, testing and incrementally try to get to a place that most people find most useful.
I think that we're reading the comments, everybody. We can start.
Yeah.
One of the things I know, Jordan, did you have a question?
Oh, we can also see here, as far as some of the things. One thing in the comment that went by was mentioned a variety of tech, and one thought I had spurred by that was a question towards you, Andrew, around with the book and the rate technology moves. What did you find the kind of change from the last edition of the book to the next? What kind of changes did you see going on, and how do you approach that in your writing to deal with such a fast-moving tech landscape?
That's a really good question. So the last edition was actually, we put it out in 2013, and that's a longer. it was a longer time between editions than previous ones. And one reason was just we kind of fully embraced Windows 8 and UWP and and it was obvious to do so because it was great technology, and still, is the stuff there is still great technology. The problem was you needed to be on either Windows 8 or then Windows 10 to use it. At the time, Windows 8, and nobody was on Windows 8. And suddenly we had a book out there that the vast majority of Windows users couldn't use. And so we made put a huge amount of work into putting in a WPF update, where we actually basically had a WPF learner's guide as an appendix so that you could actually use it, which turned out to be fantastic for this edition, because that proved that the pattern of having a learner's guide appendix with replacements for specific projects actually wasn't effective. I was concerned that might distract from the learning, but it turns out people are fine just flipping to it. And that meant that's exactly the model we used for the Visual Studio for Mac learner's guide. Like it was literally the same model. Like that's how, as soon as behind the scenes, that's like through Cody connected to the Visual Studio for Mac team and put a lot of work into it, who are just amazing to work with. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Cody. And we were able to really put in full first class citizen support for Visual Studio for Mac. But through that, it was just a lot of thinking about how do we make this so that this, supporting technology rather than making it exclusive, so that you have to be on Windows 8. Oh crud! Now we have to figure out a way to support others. Make it inclusive. Now we got super lucky with that because .NET Core came out, and with .NET Core comes not just cross-platform, but just platform stability. It means that I'm really confident that being able to concentrate on .NET Core console apps for a lot of it, and then introduce desktop apps or Blazor apps, depending on whether you're using which platform you're using, and then adding onto that Unity. Like I feel like these are all platforms that will have a long lifespan, but more importantly, being able to, I really tried to, I think one thing that, one approach that I took to really kind of hedge against platform changes, being able to finding out, oh wait, this platform we really depend on isn't available, which I don't think is going to happen again. Really, a really useful thing, learning-wise, like if you really want to get something into your head, take it, implement it as a console app, and then implement again as a WPF app, and implement again as a Blazor app or a WinForms. Take it across multiple, figuring out what goes into the class that's shared between them, figuring out what goes. That's a huge tool for getting something into your brain, and we use that a lot.
So how to reuse everything you've already written. Don't repeat work. Perfect. Yeah.
I also think that the stability that we're getting with .NET 6 and whatnot, and the fact that the end platform is like something that's bolted on top of the stable foundation. So I want to make a Xamarin app for iOS. Oh, now I want this to target Android. Now I want this to target Win UI or whatever. Having that stability at the base is going to really make that learning method even more powerful, I think, because you can start to think about things in an abstract way. Like, no matter what platform the end user wants to run this on, how can I design this app or this code base in a way that is stable there? And I think that's going to be, huge. Like you said, with you mentioned the WPF changes, right, that you went through, but also speaks to some of the challenges of when you make something really good, like WinForms, it was great. Like trying to,
it still is. It's still supported and it's still awesome.
Right, exactly. And so trying to make tooling that it's hard. It's like when you make a masterpiece, it's hard to, improve upon it, right? Or something. I haven't made a masterpiece ever, so I don't know. Maybe it is easy, but the point being
what we hear.
that the ability to improve upon things can sometimes be almost restrictive, but it takes real creativity to break out of that jail, right? Of like trying to one up your own best work. So I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Well, actually, I think you brought up a really, really important point. The idea of a solid core that you build off of. I mean, that's, it seems obvious when you say it, but that's actually from an architecture standpoint, that's a really important decision that you have to make early on. That's one of the reasons that some of the great open source projects that have been with us for so long, where Firefox, starting with Mozilla, Linux, these, where you have a stable core and some sort of add-on, plug-in, some sort of system that you can add on to. This is something Agile teams really adopted. This is the whole cathedral in the bazaar, Eric Raymond stuff. It's the that applies. I mean, that's exactly why what you're saying is has such a deep truth to it.
I think VS Code could go in that list of
absolutely
massively extensible with a core kind of understanding and workable thing. I wanted to transition to just a few questions. Some of them are a little off topic, but this was about the refactor rename experience, and very interested in fixing some TypeScript stuff. I can forward that to Sana, to the TypeScript team, and moving a file in C#. It should fix namespaces automatically. We are currently working on the move code experience, so it's definitely on our mind. I think you might be able to find some issues on GitHub that's already addressing it and work underway. We do have sync namespace and file name. Once it's already moved, it's a refactoring that you can trigger, but we don't do it like instantly. I think that's still in the works. I'll have to ask Andrew Hall and see if he's completed that. This one I think is for Andrew. So looking back 30 years and how developer tools have changed, how do you expect development tooling? I think it's how it will look like.
Oh, interesting. Well, so going back 30 years, what is it? We're in 2021 now. So in 51? 1991, I was a freshman in college. When I was in high school, most of the coding I did was x86 assembler using a hex editor and text editor and a possibly less than legally acquired version of
Don't say that live stream.
It's past the statute of limitations.
Honestly, I think that the statute of limitations on a 30-year-old version of Turbo Assembler has expired.
True.
So I'm okay with that one. They can come after me if they need to. I'll pay for it now. I'm happy to edit this before we post it.
We're there. We gotta go back.
Let me clap right now so we know when to edit.
Yeah, but no, seriously, and your IDE was a text editor. The best for me was Quick Basic, probably Turbo Pascal or Emacs. You spent a lot of time in Emacs. And what I think, if I wanted to choose one thing to answer the question, I think the one thing that kind of summarizes what has improved over the last 30 years is the feedback loop. Being able to put something in and reduce the feedback loop of between when you type the code and when you see it run, and be able to get a result and use that to modify your code. And I think that a big thing that has helped with that. I got a little friend here who will help with this conversation. This is Sammy Samosa. I think that the unit testing and test-driven development have made a huge difference. And I think that that's a really good example of a combination of tooling and process, and stuff that we do and the tools that we use.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Are we going to say 20?
No, I was to say one of the things I really want to see, and Kendra, this will probably be more on you and your team. You mentioned how sometimes breaking changes can mess with your flow that you're used to. We need to implement some sort of machine learning that learns each developer's habits. Like, do they put semicolons automatically, or do they do their quotes automatically? And then adjust the key mappings, adjust the autocomplete to match what they're used to, because it is really frustrating to try to hop into something. It's like, oh, I used to have to do these quotes, now it does it for me, and now I'm double quoting everything, and that's annoying. We need to be able to like predict that.
Man, I've always wanted to figure out if we can chain user interactions and learn from them. Like, did they just Control Z that refactoring? Should we not suggest that as often? There's so many little tweaks we can still do. I absolutely see years and years of work ahead of us of what we can fix in the experience.
Edge has that new feature where, like, if a site will say, do you want to show notifications? If people normally hit block on it, then they're not even going to pop that one up anymore. So it's kind of the same idea where we learn from the people.
Absolutely.
My question was, would that shorten the feedback loop? Like, how would that shorten the feedback loop of what's in my head to what's my fingers to what I see to get it back into my head to figure out what I'm going to do next?
Neural implants.
No, I feel like any of us who have had to go back and fix enough bugs, especially one that's in hardware, I would make us scared enough of neural implants to never want to get one.
Yeah. When you said shorten the feedback loop, I actually understood it as like, oh yeah, the machine learning model can tell us how we were actually supposed to tool it, and we can change that and roll that out as a default, like in the next version. But the feedback loop for people learning.
Although I feel like
you don't want to be unpredictable.
I feel like machine learning is, as much as it could be a useful tool for users, I feel like it could be a more useful tool for folks like you who are actually building the tools. Because there's just the sheer amount of feedback you get. Like the quote thing you mentioned earlier. Like, I just put in a new feature request for if you've got an if-else statement and you go to that's just a single line, so it doesn't have closing brackets, and you put a opening bracket at the end of the parentheses after the if line. It should fill in the closing bracket and then jump your cursor down to inside it. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I love that. I want that. It's something I use all the time in other IDEs. But would that really would that have an impact? Like, how? And I feel like figuring out. I feel like that would be an application of machine learning, figuring out, looking at things like that and figuring out which might actually have the best bang for their buck in terms of.
It's all in Python, not to worry about brackets at all.
Yeah.
Tabs.
Were people able to write more code with less keystrokes, I guess, in shorter time? It's so hard to understand what metric was right and what to track, because then we also don't know if they needed to go back and refactor that during a session, and it's almost like, I feel like we are in a way working in the Stone Age almost, because a lot of these insights we get from just watching people and asking if they'll come and do like a customer interview, and we can just watch them hit refactorings and kind of see their keyboard commands and stuff. And that's so much, that's such an anecdotal evidence when we know millions of people are using this editor, I wonder what machine learning could figure out and report back to us on how things should have been designed, if we had something that could learn like that. But maybe in 30 years, if that's the time span, who knows what could happen.
Yeah.
Windows 37, right? Or whatever version will be.
Windows 102.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, could you imagine?
Mm.
Okay.
We have some good questions here. I'm interested in Blue Spidey. I really don't like the influence of VS. Could you expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind? I'm just curious to see, like, we have
that bad influence.
Yeah, I have such warm fuzzy feelings about VS Code that I'm having trouble imagining how it would be a bad influence. I mean, there's differences.
Maybe
I'm just curious.
Going and getting the coffee, the extra time that things might take to search, and I'm not sure. Cody, you got a brilliant idea.
I don't know which one that was.
I'm just gonna go. Oh no, we don't know. Yeah, just everything you said.
Yeah. I feel like.
Thank you, Yogesh.
I felt like I do really like this one. I'd love to see a proper version control for machine learning. We struggle with that all the time. Actually, IntelliCode models, if you've followed any of our IntelliCode stuff, IntelliCode was our machine learning sort of code completion. It could figure out what your recent edits were and reapply those in other places. It's very, very cool. We would roll out a new model about every month that's retrained on like several thousand open source GitHub repos, and knowing when the model is changing, if you're using it, could have unexpected results. Maybe one month it's kind of weird and your IntelliSense list is looking really strange because we included a repo that we shouldn't have and retrained on something that's actually really specific to a certain context, but we didn't know. I would love some good version control for that. We don't have a great way to, it all comes back to versioning and version control. We're just slowly figuring out that everything needs a number behind it.
I think like this might not be specific to our tools, but I think that in some sense we're going to have to slow down at some point in the future, right? Like we'll start to look at stability and all that as being more important than innovation in a sense, or innovating upon stability. I think that might be a big thing in the future too, just kind of like take stock of where we're at with technology. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but
what's the runaway train you see right now? what should we be slowing down? Is it VS versions or?
No, I'm talking more about.
We've gotten feedback on that of there's too much too soon and too quickly, and people can't keep up with features, and just some other. We also have the other side of the coin where people love it and they update and they want the previews, and there's comments right now asking about the latest .NET 6 preview 1 that we blogged about yesterday. Anyway, what?
Or were you talking about more like slowing things down as a more general, like we've, the last 30 years, the hardest problems of, you look at any technology, you see a huge number of big problems that need to be solved. Whether it's, telecommunications or refrigeration or travel, or transportation. And while the, there's that, there's that kind of the 80-20, you spend a huge amount of time getting to the end of that 80%, gets you a huge part of the way, but then you're
right.
Or in basic, now you're, once you get something that people can really use, and it's really, really, you're going to start seeing marginal returns. And you have to really, it's the combination of marginal returns and just a flood of possible things you could do, that makes it really critical to choose the right features to build, which is why I guess you guys have a hard job.
Maybe is that maybe part of it though, that like, because the Pareto principle where 20% of the features takes 80% of the time, do we avoid that 20%? I'm not saying we do, I'm just thinking out loud. Like, is that something that like, security takes a long time. It's really hard and it takes a long time to get right. So do we avoid that 20% to focus on the stuff that doesn't take 80% of the time, and that allows us to iterate?
Because the flip side of the Pareto principle is the 90-90 rule, right? Like the first 90% of the features takes 90% of the time, and the last 10% of the features takes 90% of the time. So,
exactly, yeah. Oh, Blue responded.
Yeah, thank you for telling us your thinking there. So, quick pace of VS Code development, he's saying, is what took over the VS team. It's interesting. I don't think the quick pace of VS Code is actually what affected it. It's really the quick pace of the whole ecosystem. More frequent updates that are much smaller and more agile for really, really tighter feedback loops is what we needed. As far as like stability and new stuff, we are still changing a lot, and we definitely are going very rapidly. If you're using preview versions and that's where you're running into a lot of these bugs, I'd say maybe don't update as frequently to the preview versions if it's really blocking you, because we have several customers who have said, just release it. We'll find the bugs, we'll log them, and just keep, spitting out what you can spit out. So which is, we're not fully leaning into that. We still do lots and lots of internal testing. Everything is used for multiple weeks by thousands of developers internally before we release it externally. And so we still have we still use our own tools before we would give them to the public and everything, but we don't catch everything still. 20,000 preview users are also way more helpful than the few thousand, internal users who are going to use it as well. So
that speaks to the breadth of what people do with these tools too, right? Like, there are so many edge cases, like,
oh yeah,
that being able to predict all of them is maybe that's the task for machine learning, right?
I think it's interesting firing a couple thoughts in my head of both of these. There's one on the rate of technology, and like you were saying, Cody, about things stabilizing. There's a level too of, like, you've got this, I think the book was Crossing the Chasm, and it has this graph that talks about how technology moves. And it's like there's a phase near the end where most of us live in this later phase around, we're working in stuff that's, I think they call it the late majority. Like most developers are kind of working in a space of some really solid tech that's been around for a while. But then you've also got a chunk that's got to work on early adopter phases, the stuff early on that is also moving fast. So it's been an interesting challenge for me to even watch in the 8 or almost 10 years I've been working on VS tooling, of that shift of needing to be able to move quickly to respond to the industry changes, but also how do you ship quickly, but also keep stable for the large chunk of us developers who are working in this, I got to get my expense tracking application working today with this update. I'm not using the new tech. I've got to, keep what I do today stable while I'm also learning on the new stuff. So it's an interesting balance. It ties in also with these trends going forward of, like, quick iteration. You got to respond fast to market pressures, but also not destabilize the product.
There's a flip side to that too. That sometimes what people are asking for isn't what they actually need. I don't know if any of you have read The Inmates Are Running the Asylum by Alan Cooper, who created Visual Basic. And so that he's kind of like the grandfather of Visual Studio. And he has a great story in there about how, I believe, Logitech had approached his company to, they basically had this scanner. It was in the 90s when it was basically the home scanner was kind of a novel thing. And they wanted to have features for it. Basically, wanted a light version of Photoshop. And he's like, well, it's hard to use. Can you slap in a user interface on it? When they looked at it and they realized that you actually look at the users. There were either designers who actually had Photoshop or just people who wanted to, like, crop their photos or rotate them. And rotating a photo was actually significant back that took some firepower back in the mid-90s. And be able to save them because, grandma didn't know where to save her, where her files were going to end up. Not just grandma, me too.
Right, I was going to say that
random scanning software stuck it in, yeah. And what they did was they actually stripped out all the extra features. All the thing that we're used to now with cropping, they made a thing where you could basically see the entire photo, and then the cropped part was in color and the rest of it was in black and white, or grayed out or whatever. And just that, something with file management and something to rotate the photos. And the reviews of it said this was the most powerful scanning software that's ever been released for with a scanner, because they concentrated on just the features that the users actually needed, stripped out. By stripping out a whole bunch of stuff that nobody was going to use, they made their software more powerful. And that's paradoxical, right? Removing features can make your software more powerful. Well, yeah, because it takes the features that people actually need and makes them easier to find and easier to use. Discoverability is really, really important.
Right.
That's a lesson for your code too, right? Like, one of the reasons I mentioned refactoring, and refactoring makes your code more discoverable. Visual Studio is one of the reasons I especially love VS for Mac. Is I found that, like, you pop it up, it's the interface is super clean, and stuff is just really discoverable. And I think that some of the feedback, some of the comments I'm seeing, like, I feel like it, especially when we're talking about, like, the functionality of VS Code compared to Visual Studio, I feel like some of that has to do with discoverability. I feel like when the person was talking about, negative impact of the VS Code attitude on Visual Studio, which while I don't necessarily agree with that, I could see. I wonder if what this person is responding to is relative, not even better or worse, just differences in discoverability, and changing the way you discover new things can make a huge impact on your existing user base. There's an application from machine learning, by the way, making things discoverable, highlighting things, without actually changing the core way you access them, just giving somebody an easy way to get to them.
I think one of the hard things also from perspective of where we are as developers who are also developing tools is how prescriptive do we get, right? Like, you come from the olden world where, VS came out in a box software and it was whatever the PMs and the engineering leads thought was needed at that time, versus now the high feedback world where we're constantly getting customer feedback and asking customers and iterating quickly, or how Windows does their feedback. Being prescriptive is hard because we are necessarily going to cut out a large majority of users because they don't think like us or work like us, or but it's also being too bizarre, like, right, to use the Raymond example, you can sometimes get something that's very fragmented. So finding that balance, I think, is extremely hard. I don't know if there is a balance, if it's just, we're constantly, pendulum swinging each way or what. But we want to take some more questions for the last few minutes.
Oh, bring back Clippy.
There was, this was about Web Clipper on some Edge feedback that I need to forward to VS Code team. But bring back Clippy, that discoverability. Andrew, I feel like you sent me on a bit of a mind journey about discoverability and how removing features can make your product more powerful. And I feel like I haven't spent enough time digesting this.
This is becoming the .NET philosophy hour.
Yeah, I love it. Kendra learns.
Yeah,
it's a journey. I don't know.
That's.
Did you see any questions you wanted to call out, Cody? I've been trying to keep an eye. There's questions that I was kind of ignoring. Yeah.
That looks interesting.
The which one?
Christopher at 10:52. My time might be, I don't know. I think it's probably.
Oh yeah, I love the fast release cycle of VS, but it does seem like it hangs more often than it used to. File bugs, please.
Yeah, file bug.
File bugs.
If you have a repro, like if it hangs predictably, that's like super powerful. There's a lot of things that you don't want to do the whole works on my machine approach, but it's trying to reproduce on these hangs and it's also with the vast variety of hardware out there that people are running on. Like, it can be the best way to get that fixed is just to contact one of us. You can tweet at any of us, and we can forward it on to the appropriate team. You can also tweet Andrew. I don't know if he,
Tweet me. Yeah, feel free to tweet me.
That's what me and Andrew met, was tweeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Twitter worked. Incidentally, the reproducibility of bugs. That's one of the things that we use the Visual Studio debugger in early on. I felt like that's one of those concepts that people think is, you got to think about debugging later on. That's not something you really teach people right out of the gate, but that's something we teach people right out of the gate. And the value of being able to reproduce a bug and tracking it down, I think we nail that down, and we talk about that very early on in the book, and using the VS debugger specifically as a way to show that.
Kendra, if you want to promote Jonas's comment, Jonas RC86, that speaks to the difficulties of some of this, right? His cat has not had a hang in a long time. So it's like we have, there's two conflicting pieces of feedback, and they're both right because they both are speaking to that user's experience. So being able to find out what's the diff, right? If we're going to do like a diff in the way that people use software, what's the diff that's causing it to hang more for one and less for another? And how do we not, it's not this straightforward, but, how do we ensure that we don't fix Christopher's hangs, but accidentally cause more for Jonas in that fix, right? Like there's a lot of these balance points that we have to find. It's I don't want to I feel like I'm making excuses or anything, but it's more of, it's an interesting problem to solve from a philosophical standpoint too.
It's where we live, we can't make everyone happy, or we don't know how to in many ways, and being in trade-offs and everything is part of it. I can say we have some monitoring, and we don't release Visual Studio versions that we know are going to slow people down. We have like threshold limits. Like we measure IntelliSense delays, and if it gets over, I think it's like if we add 32 milliseconds or something, we have some wiggle room, but that's it on IntelliSense delays. And if it's over that, we can't release this feature. We need to figure out how to make the refactoring faster or whatever that calculation added to it.
And there's also
I'm sorry, that's amazing.
It's cool, but that's only on our machines and what hardware we happen to be testing on and what people are using internally, what we can get, preview users using. And we don't have infinite combinations of things to test on and scenarios and everything. So.
And extensions. I don't want to throw extensions under the bus or anything, but those interact so much with the code base. And I think that, they're one of those double-edged swords. They expand the usability and the reach of VS and VS Code so much, but they also don't have the same level of testing stuff because they don't have the same resource. Like, you don't have however many Microsoft employees that are running dog food versions of each extension. So they're necessarily going to have impacts that we can't predict. So responding to those agilely, to use your word, Andrew, to kind of something is really good.
Oh, but just anybody who wants kind of a masterclass in product design and development, just what Kendra just said about being able to track the number of milliseconds, and there's in the IntelliSense pop, like the amount of scaffolding you have to have in place to be able to do that. Just do yourself a favor, take a few minutes and just think about, like, if you just want a good learning exercise, think about what it would take, what you have to put in place to be able to gather those numbers and then use them effectively. And then figure out how you can apply that to your own projects. There's just a tiny little story, but there's just a huge number of lessons in that. I kind of clip that out and put it on the wall right there.
Also, our expectations are getting more like, one of the things when we talked about Jordan, I can remember this probably quite fondly or not fondly, is when we were talking about the new editor, what is an acceptable delay in typing? Like, is it 50 milliseconds? Is it 100 milliseconds? And it seems like it's splitting hairs, but mostly a thing like typing, which is a cumulative experience, right? Each 50-second will eventually add up to 1 second where you're 3 letters ahead of where you're seeing on the screen. And everything we do in technology is cumulative. It's not, or additive and multiplicative. It's not just like a linear, thing. There's probably some statistics terms I don't know that I'm really messing up right now, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Maybe. Yeah. These things add up.
Yeah. There's a reason we have over 100,000 tests on Roslyn. It's a massive code base, and it's because we find these corner cases and relying on the community to report. I love that in the chat, people are like, oh, I haven't lagged in years. And we're
also having people who are helping each other, hey, try this, it's great.
Yes, please send us logs. That's why the developer community feedbacks or the provide feedback tool in Visual Studio can capture a lot of logs and kind of figure out what people are actually experiencing.
And tweet at us.
And tweet at us.
I'm at, what am I at? I don't have my thing on my name. Can I change my name without messing up? I probably can't. I'm at _Beyer.
Yeah, I've tweeted about you. Anyway. What?
Tweeting about you left and right.
Yeah.
All right, well,
okay.
do we get kicked off at 11? Or do we get kicked off automatically at 11?
I don't think so. I think we can hang out. I wanted
more
one.
Hours.
I know, this is such a good topic. I think I wanted.
Blue Spide had a comment, random occurring bugs are the worst. And I just wanted to say the technical term of art for that is Heisenbug. And so that's, if you don't know that term, that's a great term.
Or the
pain in the neck is my technical.
Oh, yeah.
Well, silly. So I think to put a cap on it, we were talking a little bit about how the approach to learning has also changed, and the approach and the welcome that people get in the coding community has changed a lot over the past few years, and probably a lot this year as well. Do you want to comment on that, Andrew?
Sure. Oh, man. Well, first of all, the first thing that comes to mind is recognizing that gatekeeping is a problem. Having a community that's actually welcoming and supportive is huge. Being able to find people, being able to go out there and being able to see, here are my, not just what resources are available, but there are other human beings that you can actually connect with is huge. I think the tooling is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was. Again, going back to discoverability. You know what? I'm gonna talk about one of my favorite discoveries in Visual Studio. Then how I think it helps people learn. If you go into the quick fix menu, you have an interface that's got a property, and you implement the interface. It'll use a lambda. It'll actually use a it'll use a little lambda operator. And something about seeing that, lambdas for some reason confuse the heck out of a ton of people. But somehow seeing the IDE generate that helps connect that. And I feel like that's a microcosm of a bigger thing that I think will answer is kind of what you're talking about, is finding lots of little ways in the tooling, in the community, in resources that connect a real problem, where the problem we're trying to solve is, how do I get this thing to my head? Well, I don't understand this thing. Especially this thing's a little bit intimidating. It's amazing how much intimidation is a big part of not being able to learn something. And having some way of turning that into something friendly, just seeing it on screen, being able to make it myself. Even if all I did was click a quick fix menu, click a little light bulb icon, click a thing that said implemented interface, and suddenly, oh, I created a lambda myself. Well, that's huge. That's huge.
Oh, we lost your audio.
Oh, no, I'm back. Yeah,
I think
sorry.
you're back, yeah.
Yeah, the earbud just fell out. Yeah, so I feel like that's, I feel like finding those barriers and figuring out a way, almost like a self-service kind of way. I can find it myself. I can discover it myself. I can discover the community. I can connect to other people myself. And then I've done it, and I see it on screen. That breaking down the intimidation, breaking down the gatekeeping, that's something it wasn't even on our radar even 5 years ago. And now it's an actual big thing that works. And I feel like, that's, the more we can, none of these lessons are new, go back to Don Norman, the design of everyday things, these are things that usability, UX people have known for a long time, even before computers or, just how to use things. And we don't have to get into a lot of psychology of it. It's just making things friendly and easy and not scary. All of us are intimidated by some things. Part of understanding your own learning curve is figuring out where you've hit that intimidation wall. And figure out how you deal with it. Maybe it's that's the time to switch to another window, do something else for a while. Maybe it's a time for switching contexts, finding a different way, going from visual learning to just reading the code to watching a video. Figuring out where that is for you is a huge part of learning. And I think that we've just, where we are now in the industry and our ability to find things, especially in the Visual Studio ecosystem, is at a really, I think it's in a really good place. It's just so exciting to be a part of it, honestly.
We're excited too, but I did notice that Yogesh just said that we're 13 minutes away from Mars. I don't think we should preempt that.
Yeah, they're landing the Mars rover.
Landing a Mars rover, 4 people talking about tooling.
And just so Andrew, that's all spoken like a true teacher. Head First C# is the book. If you like this guy, this character right here, it's really good. You can find it on Amazon. Follow Andrew on Twitter. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a wonderful, wonderful chat.
Great conversation. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
All right.
And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, for all of you out there.
Enjoy landing on Mars.
Keep filing feedback. We want to figure out what you're experiencing too. Bye. All right.